What's going on, everybody? We're back at Tell the Story Doc on All of Life TV. I'm excited because, there's a lot of guests that are going to be coming up in the future, but there are very few of them that I could call brothers, right? Like there's some that are friends, some that people I just met over the years and seen at conferences or maybe worked with, but there are very few that I would call brothers. And this guy right here, he is a brother of mine. Not just in this fraternity of church planters, but also in a real life fraternity. Like, we are a part of the same fraternity. So put your heads together wherever you are, put an emoji or whatever for Brandon Woodard, pastor, evangelist, missionary Brandon Woodard.
What's going on, man? I really appreciate you having me on. Man, this is a big deal. And I'm honored, brother. I'm definitely honored.
I've had the podcast for a little bit, and I think you and I have mentioned it here and there. But as I thought about people who I wanted to make sure was on it, you were one of those people. Because again, just like I said in the intro, I can read somebody's book or I can manufacture something off somebody's tweets. But you and I really talk. Like, we have conversations, and you make sure that you talk to me. You hold me accountable, which I need in my life. And we've had so many crossways, I would say, of things that I feel like the Lord just kind of put you and I on the same path in so many ways. So, man, the purpose of this podcast is we want to tell people the real life stories of ministry and church leadership and church planting. And you are a church planter. You've planted a church. You're a pastor. So, man, I don't want to tell the story for you. Wherever you feel like God started working in your life, especially as it pertains to ministry, let's start there, man. And I'll give you an opportunity to tell some of the story.
Yeah. So, man, I'll say this before I jump into the story. A lot of the things that happened at Reconcile Community Church as it relates to how we were practically fleshing out ministry in our context came directly from conversations that you and I had. And in a lot of ways, man, I want to give you your flowers because, man, you've been a faithful planter and you've set an example for guys like me who came after you. To be able to learn from you, man, and just all of the conversations that we've had, I'm thankful. I was a better planter because of our relationship. And so I know that, planting can be difficult and tough, but man, just from the onset, I just want to say thank you to you, my brother, for, taking the calls that I had, fielding questions that I may have had. Man, they were immensely helpful, and people in Cincinnati were blessed because of the ministry of identity. So, yeah, man, you need your flowers. You need your flowers, my brother.
I don't need no flowers, but I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you, man.
But man, yeah, so it's crazy. I went to Ohio State. You can see all the stuff behind me. It kind of, everybody, that's the running joke that I bleed scarlet and gray. But while I was at Ohio State, got saved, and then, man, it quickly felt called to some type of ministry. I was in a college ministry called Athletes in Action.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I got to interrupt you. Y'all see this stuff behind him? This man is a D1 track athlete, okay? He's a D1 athlete. So he's trying to breeze past his Ohio State thing. Nah, this man is a D1 track star, okay?
I digress.
All right.
But yeah, while I was there, so I was doing Athletes in Action and fell in love with just discipleship and disciple making. So brothers that were on our team, man, I'm leading them to Jesus and being able to baptize them. And there's a whole bunch of crazy stories about that. But the guy who was discipling me got me into the idea of pastoral ministry because I was like, man, if I could just do what I'm doing with Athletes in Action, I'll do that. But man, long story, crazy set of circumstances. He connected me with a guy named Derek Puckett, who you definitely need to have on the podcast at some point. And man, Derek was down at Fellowship Memphis going through residency. And he was like, man, you need to come down here. They got something going that's special. They're, helping guys learn how to plant churches. Man, I didn't know what planting churches was. I didn't know what seminary was. Man, I didn't know what none of that was. The only thing that I knew is that, man, I felt like the Lord was calling me to preach, teach, and shepherd people. That was it. And it wasn't until I got to Memphis and went through the residency program And really, I didn't start the residency program right away. I worked for an organization called City Leadership, but I was intern at Fellowship Memphis. And man, I remember getting down there, and I only had enough money to get to Memphis. Like, this is the funny thing. I got to Memphis, went to service on a Sunday, and thought I was in a cult because I had never seen like diversity like that. And you've been there back in those days where it was wild. Like, you were seeing all type of people. Bro, I called my mom and was like, I mean, I feel like God called me down here, but man, this might be a cult. And she was like, well, you're going to have to ride it out. And man, I'm glad I stayed, because then that gave me this vision for church planting, this vision for what ministry could look like. And then I began to dream back in it would have been in 2011, because this is when Evernote was popping. And I pulled up an Evernote file and I started to write down a dream of what I would love to see happen in my neighborhood back in Cincinnati. And that was the early stages of Reconcile Community Church. And so, yeah, man, that's a little bit about like just call to ministry. I mean, I love Memphis dearly because I met my wife in Memphis. Man, we had 3 kids in Memphis. Man, I mean, I loved every part of Memphis, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It literally made me who I was. So, especially as a pastor.
I love it, man. I love it. You know, a couple of things I love about that story, and I've heard your story a few times, man. One of the biggest things I love is like your story starts with discipleship. Like your entryway into ministry actually starts with discipleship. And man, shout out to Derek Puckett. He's a mutual friend of ours, much better friend of you. Because you've known him longer, you know what I mean? And y'all spent that quality time together. And he's a brother I love and respect. And I do hope he gets on a podcast at some point. But I think it's just real beautiful that like his interaction in your life could like lead you to this whole new phase. And I echo a lot of what you say, man. Like whenever I remember the first time we walked in to Fellowship Memphis, and we were just like, yo, we've never seen anything like this before. Like, this is kind of wild. And how are they doing this? And why is there so many people here at one time? And, you know, what's interesting is, I think you probably heard our last podcast where I was talking to Charlie about what was going on at Epiphany at the time. But the truth of the matter is, like, if Epiphany was Rockefeller Records, then like Fellowship was something similar. Like it was like Def Jam or something like that, because you would see Brian Laritz, and then you would see all these young guys, you, Chris Davis, Derek Puckett, Steve Coble, you know, Trevor Jenkins. And I mean, even Ricky Jenkins, like all of you guys were there around that same time. And it was a moment, man. It was a moment in the multi-ethnic church thing. So, man, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about Memphis in a little bit.
Sure.
But after Fellowship molded you in a certain way, how did that kind of push you into the next part of your like ministerial journey?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. So I tell a lot of people this, man. I learned about church planting in the business side or the administrative side of ministry at Fellowship Memphis. But then I took kind of like this weird turn where I started helping Pastor Brian with a ministry called Kainos. And so we started to build that. And so I got a lot more executive, like training in that part. But then I said, man, if I'm going to plant a multi-ethnic church, I need to spend time in the Black church. And so by God's grace, I was able to go to one of the oldest Black churches in Memphis, Tennessee, called Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church. And shout out to the Boulevard, because I know that there are some members who will definitely watch this. But man, I learned how to pastor there. So if I learned, you know, business admin, church planting, high level executive functioning at Fellowship Memphis, I learned how to pastor at the Boulevard.
Yeah.
I mean, I was one of the youngest guys on staff, and I can remember, man, pulling up on Sunday, and man, I'm the youngest by like 30 years. But man, the people were so gracious. They loved me. They were patient with me. And man, they just really helped me cut my pastoral teeth. And so I learned how to just be with people. And then I learned a perspective that, man, I really value and cherish, that I feel like, man, that is offered to those who are a part of the Black church. And so it just, man, it shaped my heart for ministry. And so by the time I was leaving there, I felt like I was ready to plant back home. But yeah.
You know what I love about that? I think I heard, I don't know if it was Laritz or Eric Mason say this probably maybe about 10 years ago. And they were like, there are some guys, Black guys in particular, that are looking to plant multi-ethnic churches that would not be able to survive in the Black church.
It's true.
And I remember hearing that like, oh, snap.
Yeah, it's true.
Because, yeah, we at the time, and I would say we're kind of still riding that wave a little bit, where there are guys who've never had real interaction with the Black church. And of course, we use the Black church as this, we're talking about the big version of it, not like the micro version of it.
Right.
There are guys who've never spent any time in that, in that place or in what God is doing in the Black church, and yet they desire to have a church that is multiracial, not multi-ethnic.
That's good.
Because there's a difference, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Tell me about that. Like, how would you explain that?
Yeah. So, man, so the funny thing is this. So when you think about the Black church, we have to make a disclaimer that, man, there's no monolith in the Black church.
Amen.
There's no just one size fits all. I mean, there could be two Black churches right next to each other. And I'm using Black church just the larger sense. You can have two Black churches sitting right next to each other and they be fundamentally different in every way. From the ecclesiology, from how they are, fleshing out ministry in the community, the relationships that they have, the stances that they take, the way they interact with the community could be totally different. And then even when you think about, the particular church that you're a part of, man, then you have a whole caveat of differences even within the congregation. So at the Boulevard where I was at, it was the upper class or the upper class of African Americans. We were having conversations about things that were totally different than, a sister church that would have been right down the street where the congregation would have been socioeconomically a little bit less than where we were at.
Right.
And so like those dynamics are totally different. When we talk about, multiracial, we're talking about, I usually consider it along Black and white lines. Multi-ethnic, you're talking about other nations inside of the congregation. You're talking about a whole set of other circumstances and situations you're going to have to be thinking critically through. When I was at the Boulevard, we were thinking about issues as it relates to Black and white dynamics in Memphis, Tennessee. It was very rare that we had a global perspective on something. Sure, we acknowledged it, but that wasn't where the boots on the ground and how we were trying to think through how are we going to actually do the ministry. It was through the paradigm of the congregation that we had and the dynamics that that was a part of that particular congregation. So it was totally different. It was totally different than when I went back home to Cincinnati, I had to stand as the interim executive director at my send-in church where my father in the ministry, Bishop Gary G. Hales, is at. Totally different Black church experiences.
Yeah.
Like, and they wouldn't, if you put them next to each other, you'd be like, these are diametrically opposed, but they both love Jesus. They're both reaching their communities and they're both making disciples. But the culture of the churches were totally different, even though they were Black churches. So Black church isn't a monolith. And I think it is more multi-racial than it is necessarily at times multi-ethnic.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 110%. And I think if you're a planter, you need that time. You need that time in with a Black church. Unless you're just not targeting, the Black community in that way at all. And I think that's a strategy for some multi-ethnic planters. But for a guy like you, and what I would come to find out, a guy like me, we needed that. That's a part of who we are. Yeah. It's just a part of who we are. So although we aspire for our congregations to be diverse, the core of what we've been built up in is the Black church. And I thought it was really good that you made that move. And matter of fact, that we probably had our first few conversations
Yep.
when you were at the Boulevard.
Yep.
And it was just so interesting to me, some of the challenges you had there, and some of the challenges you had at Fellowship, and how they were completely different, but it was still, ministry just brings a lot of challenges, man. So
it does.
Now, I will say this. I didn't know you even wanted to plant a church until another mutual friend of ours, Russell McCutcheon, said, hey, Brandon's doing X, Y, and Z. And I was like, what? So how did you move into that, man? Like, how did you make that turn?
Man, it's wild. I'll say this. I don't want to give you like the Jesus answer, but it really was the Lord's moving on my heart, man. I think it was Charles Spurgeon who said it in lectures to his students. He said something about, if you don't have the burden, that unshakable burden that you can't do anything with, like you can't shake it. You wake up and it's there. You go anywhere, it's there. Like if you don't got that level of burden, as he's talking to his students, he would say, you don't need to be in ministry. You can go be, a plumber. You can go be a lawyer. Man, while I was back in 2011, I was like, man, a dream. Like, man, it would be great to go and to see this experience in Lincoln Heights, where I grew up. And then I tucked it away. And then I started to hear all of these things back in the day. There was this caricature of what a church planter should be. Not, ragging on anybody, but you know what I'm talking about. There was this, they had to have a certain type of personality. They had to have a certain type of, gravitas to them. And, people had to be flocking to them. And so I kind of put it on the back burner, like, well, that's not necessarily my temperament or, how I'm wired. But I do have this growing burden for my community where I want to see what I wrote down in my Evernote file come to pass. And so, man, I began to pray about it. I began to be like, Lord, what are you doing with all of these experiences? Like something is happening, but I can't shake this reality that, man, I want to be a part of something that's happening in my community. And so I started to look around, started to pray, started talking with my wife about it. And man, it was wild because then Kristen, my wife, was like, yeah, I think you need to go plant the church. What? Like, do I actually fit the bill of a church planter? If you know me, I'm a high introvert. I'm a systems guy. I know how to preach, but like, man, do I fit the mold? And Kristen was like, man, I don't know if you hear me. If the Lord has called you to do something, he'll handle the rest of that. It seems like you are being pulled to go plant this church. And so I began to investigate it. I started asking friends, started asking people. Some people were like, no, you don't need to plant a church. You are a good number 2 guy, but I don't necessarily think you should be a church planter. And I listened to them, but I couldn't shake the burden. I couldn't shake the call. And so, man, I had a conversation with my pastor, with my father in the ministry. And man, Bishop Gary G. Hells was like, yeah, you need to start that church, son. Like if the Lord is calling you to do that, you need to do that. And I need you to come home and, spend some time with me, and then we can send you out. And man, because he licensed me, because he ordained me, my pastor's voice in my ear is louder than most others because I trust him. Because he's put his neck on the line for me and licensing and ordaining me. And so if he's feeling like, man, if he's hearing what I'm sharing and all of these things, and he's like, man, no, I feel like, man, you can do this and I support you in it, then man, it meant the world to me. And so I just said, you know what, let's do it. I said, man, if there's ever going to be an opportunity for me to do it, let's do it. And if it fails, let's go out with a blaze of glory. That was my whole goal. Like, man, I feel like the Lord's calling me to this. My wife is on board with this. My pastor's on board with this. I got family members and people in the community, when I began to share about this, began to say, you know what? Nah, this could be something here. And then I went through a program called Leaders Collective with Elliot Grudem. And man, through that, Russell McCutcheon, our mutual friend, man, these guys just kept fanning the flame. Like, man, the Lord is up in this, do this. And man, that's when I was just like, man, I guess I'm a church planter. And even while I was planting, I never really considered myself a church planter. I'm just like, man, I'm here and I'm being faithful. Man, I just want to love people and make disciples and see, man, the gospel permeate my community and, man, see people in my context, loving Jesus and making disciples and loving our community and restoring our community to the Black Wall Street of the North like it used to be. And that kind of just fueled me, man. And I just went along with it. And I realized that, man, quickly, bro, it ain't a lot of places that was like teaching us church planting in hard places.
Nah.
And so I started to like look over. It's funny because you were talking about Charlie and the guys at Epiphany. Like, even while we were in our residency, I was constantly looking over at Epiphany Fellowship and what they were doing, like admiring what they had and what they were doing, to say, like, man, I wonder if I should have went there instead of here. But, you know, in God's providence, man, God had prepared in a lot of ways for us to be able to, you know, take those steps. But yeah, man, that's how I got into the church planting game.
So
and it was just,
you bring up a good point, and we've never had this conversation before. But let me share something with you. And I don't even know if I should be saying this on air. I don't know, but this is not the podcast where, you know, we don't have a sponsor. It's just me, right? So we had a choice. 2015, we had a choice. I've been in contact with Epiphany through a pastor that was there. He's no longer there. So I never had any direct contact with Pastor E. But I had a contact with a pastor who was there, and he was very much kind of inviting us up. And at the same time, I was talking to the people at Fellowship. And what it boiled down to for us is, like, we're Southern. Like, my wife is from, you know, the Memphis area. I'm from North Carolina. We felt like we fit Fellowship more than we fit Epiphany. But Epiphany did something that Fellowship did not do. And Epiphany, like, focused on building up a Black neighborhood and being open to being multi-ethnic. But really, you could see what their focus was. Whereas Fellowship was, they were expanding throughout the city and having just a host of diversity. But it was certain types of families and ministers and pastors that kind of fit that. And I wonder, this is just us talking right now, if the reason why we kind of felt that tension is because we might have fit a little bit more over there. And not to say we should have gone there, but to say we fit a little bit more of that than what we originally pursued. What you think about that?
I absolutely agree. It was nothing wrong with my time in my residency. You know, it was a great experience. I mean, I got to sit under, you know, one of the best preachers of this generation. You know, and that was awesome.
Who we should have on this podcast, by the way.
Yeah, by the way. And then I know you watching Dr. Loritz, so you need to get on this podcast. But like, yeah, man, like, so I don't necessarily think that it was a bad thing. What I didn't, hindsight's 2020. Soren Kierkegaard once said, man, life is best understood backwards, but you got to live it forward, right? And I think when I got in the midst of planting, I realized, I was equipped and trained to plant a certain type of church in a certain type of neighborhood, in a certain type of community, with a certain type of purview for how to impact the city. That's not the same as what I want to do, as investing in, you know, this local community that's predominantly Black, you know what I mean? That's going to have a bunch of different needs and situations that are going to be attached to it. Like, it was just, I felt like I was handed keys to a vehicle, but it wasn't the vehicle that I thought I needed. And then I had to find myself going like, so how can I make this work? How can I take some of this and, you know, and dip it in Lowry seasoning? How can I take some of this, you know, the Porterbrook stuff that I learned, realizing that, man, brothers in the hood ain't really trying to sit down and do no Porterbrook. But man, how can I take some of the essence of what I've learned and then remix it in such a way and repackage it in such a way that it will meet the people that I'm serving where they are? I mean, every facet of ministry and how I had to plant churches, I had to literally rethink everything. How I engaged the community, my discipleship structure, Sunday morning gatherings, how we built up leaders, how we utilized our space, how did we engage in our community, what our liturgy looked like all of these things that were like cut and paste. If I would have went to, you know, a specific like area or demographic or a place, I feel like, man, I could have taken everything I learned at Fellowship and just dropped and it would have worked. In fact, early on in our plant, that's what happened. I was like, man, you know what? I was taught how to plant a church a certain type of way. So we were in another community and it was easy. I was just plugging and playing. And we had hundreds of people show up, but it wasn't the church that I felt the Lord had called me to plant. I was planting somebody else's church. It wasn't like, it was not. And I remember coming home to my wife being like, it's people showing up, but I don't necessarily know if this is where we should be at. All of the people that I feel burdened for, like the community that I feel burdened for, they're not going to drive all the way over here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy because, crazy set of circumstances, we ended up having to move. We were forced to move to our community where, I felt burdened to. And man, the moment that we got there, I felt like I could breathe finally, and I knew it was going to be an uphill battle, but I was like, man, this is where we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I welcomed all of the different changes and things that I had to go through, but it made it worth it.
Man, God has a amazing way of providing that clarity, right? I've experienced it just from watching my friends and then myself. Like, you have a certain amount of success, or what looks like success, things going right. Let's put it that way. And yet you still feel discomfort. And then when you get to the place where God really wants you, it may not go well at all, but you feel this sense of peace, right? And that's how we should define all of this stuff for the church planters in the future is, hey, where's God sending you where you have peace or you've experienced peace in those places? Like, that might be the place you need to focus on, opposed to finding these metrics and talking about, how many unsaved people are in the city. And I think the whole system is broken. We'll talk about that later and in other interviews. But like, I am fully convinced, 4 years in, that like the entire system is broken and that we emphasize the wrong things. But you had an opportunity to actually take that step and then have God change your route or change your steps. And man, that second phase of Reconcile Community Church, like, what was that like for you, for Kristen, for your family, all of that?
Yeah, man, it was crazy. So we went from being smashed up in a 900 square foot duplex in a community that we couldn't afford to live in to move into the community where we are now, man. And it was a breath of fresh air, man. Early on, we were small. Our church never got, large, but we knew that it was this moment where, man, I could clear the deck and then I could ask myself the question, what constitutes a win here? What would mark, man, that we're being faithful in our community? And it was cool to just be able to spend time, man. We spent the first it would have been about 5 months. We spent just literally going around the community. No one knew we were a church. No one. We were showing up at city council meetings. Shout out to Durance Daniels. I know he probably watching this. I showed up at city council meetings. I would show up at the community garden. We would show up at St. Monica Recreation Center. Shout out to Mike Pearl. Man, and we would just be present and just be like, hey, man, like, what y'all need us to do? And we just served. And we just wanted to be consistent and serving and showing up. We went to the local elementary school and we asked Principal Bailey, like, is there anything that you need us to do? And just kept doing that. And then along the way, we started to ask the community, if a church was to come here, if a church was to start, what would you want them to do? And what would you want to see? And we allowed the community to tell us like exactly what it is. Because we have 13 churches in our community. They're all old. There's one that's probably really thriving at this point. And they're all just kind of inward facing. So I wanted to ask the community and we started to have our congregation do that. And so it was just this slow process. And I can't remember who told me along the way, but man, I'm glad they said it. They was like, Brandon, you get an opportunity to restart, but always remember slowness is a superpower. And so we just moved slow and methodical. And then once we started to catch on and we found persons of peace and we started to, do small gatherings here and there, man, it was beautiful because we were seeing the people that we had prayed for, they were coming and it was slow. but they were coming. They'll show up, to a men's Bible study, or they'll show up at a women's Bible study. They'll show up. Man, we were meeting in like a brewery in our community for a while. And like, man, they would show up and help set up and all of these things. And man, it was just this slow moving process, but we were able to include people along the way. Like, hey man, let's empower them as people are coming into the congregation and into the body. Man, how do we empower them? I'll help equip them, but how can we empower them to go and do ministry? And so as they were coming to be a part of the church plant, man, we started sending guys and women out. And man, it was just cool to just see some of the ministry opportunities that were happening. And then slow and steady, man, our community started to open up the table to us. And that's when it got dope. Like when they started to say, no, but let's have somebody from Reconcile here. We want them here. There's an after school program, or there's a back to school drive. Let's see what Pastor Brandon and Reconcile are doing. How can they help us? Like they started to reach out to us, and we felt like, man, now people actually trust us. And that was a sweet spot like for us. And it just got to a point where, man, a lot of the ministry that we did, it was specifically curtailed to our congregation. And so like in the people in our community, like our focus shifted. Like it helped me get clarity on what I needed to do from a responsibility standpoint. And just extra, like, all of the extracurriculars that we did or that I would do, man, all of that stuff was focused in on how can I best serve the people of Reconcile Community Church in Lincoln Heights.
How do you do that though? How do you do that without getting distracted, without comparing yourself to other people? Because again, like all of us got Instagram, all of us have Twitter, all of us have watched the newest conference on church planting. That's not what they tell you to do. They don't tell you to do that. They tell you to do a backpack giveaway and a fall festival and this and this and that. They don't tell you to like actually focus on the people you have and not always be outwardly focused to the people who you want.
Man, it's crazy. When you ain't got money, you can't do that stuff. You know what I mean? Like we were constantly zeroing out our bank account to do different things in the community. One time I came to the congregation and bro, no lie, I was like, we could either get a worship leader or we can help, this young lady who has, 3 kids. She just got kicked out of her place. Like what y'all want to do? And the congregation's like, we can sing together. Let's just make sure that she's straight. Like I think scarcity breeds creativity. And so because of that, like we didn't have time and we didn't have the money to do that type of stuff. So we had to creatively think of different ways of how we can engage our community. So it was a lot of stuff that we partner with, but we just brought ourselves because we didn't have the funds, or man, we couldn't do all of these things. And because we were a smaller congregation and I was tri-vocational, I had 2 other jobs while I was planting. Like I couldn't be all places at all times. Like we couldn't be the church for the entire city. Like, no, we got enough capacity for Lincoln Heights. And so we're going to have to trust that the brothers and sisters in these churches around the city would be doing the work. And so like, it was a challenge personally on a personal note where, man, I didn't have the metrics. I didn't have all of the metrics. I didn't have the dollars. I didn't say like, oh, we raised X amount of money. Like I didn't have that narrative. And so that was hard to go in spaces and be like, man, I don't got that. But one of my advisors, shout out to Kurt Hanna at Missio Day Church. I'll never forget this. And I've told every church planter that I know, especially Black and brown planters in hard places, you may not have nickels and noses, but you got stories. And those stories are highly coveted because there are a lot of pastors who would long to have the stories that you would have if you are faithful in your community.
Wow.
And he would always tell me, Brandon, you got the stories. Remember the stories. This is how you know that the Lord is doing a good work in Reconcile. Look at the people and remember the stories. And so for me, it meant like at one point, multiple stints, man, where I would just get off of social media. It meant me having to say no to a lot of stuff. And it wasn't because the stuff was like, it was great opportunities, but I was like, man, I don't need to be there. My focus needs to be on the people right now. And I would look, every now and again, I would look up for air and like see how everything was going. But for my own soul, I knew that, man, I couldn't constantly be looking at everybody else. I had to just focus in on where I was at. And I had friends in similar spaces like you, and some others who I would just reach out to. And I just kept my circle tight during that time because I knew that, man, like left to myself, that comparison, bug would come up. And I was just like, man, I don't want that to happen. And I don't want it to cause me to not love the people that God is, bringing through the doors of Reconcile, because we're not X, Y, and Z's church, or we don't got this. So I was like, let me just limit the amount of things that inputs in my life, and just really focus on ministry and our context. And that helped me. That helped me greatly.
I love it. I love it, man. You said a line that I love, man. Scarcity breeds creativity. Right. And
Yeah.
when, when you look in that cabinet and your kids got to eat and all you have is some peanut butter and like 3 crackers, you get real creative. Right.
Yeah.
Now there's a flip side to that though, which is like, I think there are a lot of Black and brown planters, especially, not exclusively, but especially, that almost live in that mindset, like that scarcity mindset, right? So like, you and I have had conversations about funding and support and all of that. I want to enter into that conversation by asking you a question. If Reconcile Community Church 3 years ago got $1 million check, like how would that have changed your approach in interacting with the community, multiplying leaders, expanding the church, all of that?
Yeah, man. It would have helped greatly. And I mean, like, honestly, we would have been able to purchase a building and be able to partner with our community partners. And we would have all collectively been able to have a bigger head start in helping reshape our community. I'm thinking of my friends over at the Heights Movement. As the church was, up and running in a community, this nonprofit was beginning to develop to help revitalize and reimagine what Lincoln Heights could be, by helping equip and support and empower the community to do the work, right? But I remember early on, they needed space. We needed space. We ended up getting an office space off the, kind of off the beaten path. But $1 million would have helped not only us get a facility, but then also we would have been able to seed and help support other community partners in the work that they were doing. I wouldn't have had to work 2 other jobs. Would have been great to free me up to be able to do that. I think it would have allowed for, we had a young guy who we licensed named Tatum Miller, man. And we had another guy that was, that we were helping equip. Man, it would have been great to give them a safe space to cut their teeth and be able to pay them, minister, like, as a minister in training, as a resident in this context, to be able to do that. I'm thinking of a guy named Jalen Rose, who was wanting to be a counselor, felt called by God to do counseling work and all of these things. And man, it would have been dope to have him in that space, to be able to fund him to go to school and get that. Like I got funded, to be able to empower guys that way, to be able to provide more opportunities for people to come to know Jesus. And then at the same time, we would have been able to support churches like Identity or Reformation or Mission, or, some of the other church planters. Like, the money wouldn't have just stayed here at Reconcile Community Church, but man, that money would have, as they say, that dollar would have turned multiple times in church planting spaces.
No.
And it would have been multiple. I think there would have been just an awesome opportunity for us to see the Lord continue the work in a bigger capacity, because it would have freed up a lot of people to be able to focus in on the ministry. A lot of planters, man, we stress out about money. We're trying to make ends meet. And I know for us, when we moved, I always knew I was going to be bivocational because I wasn't the best at support raising. But at the same time, man, to have funds to be able to do that, man, it frees you up to be able to do ministry, and you not have that gnawing sense of, man, how my family gonna eat, or man, how we gonna keep the lights on, or how we're gonna do X, Y, and Z to reach our community or to support our community. Yeah, the funds would have been absolutely vital.
Yeah, I believe that, man. And again, you and I have talked offline and had those conversations about how important it is for church planters going into specific contexts to not just like have more funds available, but have funds available for longer as
Yes,
well.
man.
Because, like I think there are different challenges for one, people going into an urban context where there's high amounts of poor households and need in that sense. Two,
Mhm.
a solo planter, a person who does not have other
Mhm.
staff, other like a worship leader. You didn't have a worship leader. We
No.
didn't have a worship leader up until, recently.
Yep.
Um, I'm like you. I'm tri or quattro. I don't know. I don't know how many jobs I have, right?
Right.
But I think there really has to have a conversation about funding. Like there has
Yeah.
to be a conversation about how we fund
Mhm.
in a different way, because there are far too many guys that are having to look at their wives and say like, no, we can't go on vacation. We can't do this. We can't do that. We're
Yeah.
surviving and the Lord is good. And we do have those stories. But I ain't gonna lie. I want the stories and the sense. Okay.
Exactly. I feel yes and amen. I feel that. I feel that. I feel that deeply. Yeah, man. We definitely got to reimagine the funding thing. I mean, it's been well documented. It's been well stated that minority pastors, they are going to be behind. And I can't remember the number, if it's like 70% or 30% or whatever it is, but needless to say, it's always going to be a gap in funding. But then this model of like self-sufficiency in 3 years, or like it's so asinine when you think about some of the context that people are going into to plant churches. And honestly, I think that's why we don't see a lot of planters going in hard places,
Mhm.
because they know they
Mm.
only got 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you need funding for 7 to 10 years. I was talking to Dr. Alvin Sanders, who planted River of Life. He's now the president of World Impact. And he was like, yeah, you need a long on ramp. Like if you're going to make it as an urban church planter, you are going to need a long on ramp. And that only happens if like the funding is going to be there. People have to reimagine that if you're going to give a guy $50,000, what would it look like if you gave him that over 10 years?
Mm.
What if it looked like if you gave it over 7 years? You know what I mean? Like to help them get to that space. We got to think there. We're going to have to start thinking like 7 to 10. 3 is just not doable unless you're going into a gentrified area and it's middle to upper middle class folk.
Mm-hmm.
And even still, you're probably not going to get that because everybody going to go to Elevation or a church that's well put together, unless you're an ARC church and you can come with $1 million out the gate. Shout out to them brothers.
Yeah,
But like that's not the reality for a lot of other brothers. And so, yeah, we gotta reimagine that. And I would say this: I think that I'm gonna get in trouble with this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Honestly, I think the money is there in churches of like churches, black and brown churches and church planners who got the money, but they've been sucked into this notion that they got to give it to, through a denomination or through this network. Like I know plenty of well-established churches that, man, they could write a check today and they could fund you for a year.
Yeah.
But it's like, I got to go through. No, who told you that you had to go through this place? Who told you that you couldn't just fund this brother and you believe in him? Who told you that you couldn't? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think the money is there. I think people got to be courageous enough to say, like, we're going to invest for the next 7 years over here. And y'all got to be okay with that. I think the money is out there. I think people just scared to give it, because then what happens when you commit to giving to a church in the hood and they only have 20 members and you commit to giving to them for 7 to 10 years? It don't look good on your spreadsheet or when you going out and sharing these things. But man, we got to reimagine what's a win here.
Yeah.
If that church is faithful and people are coming to know Jesus and it's a beacon of light in that community and disciples are being made, the community is being transformed, Jesus is being glorified, you dang right I'm going to support this church.
Yeah. Man, I'm interviewing Thabiti in about 2 weeks, and I really look forward to it, because a couple of weeks ago he did a live stream where he was talking about funding, and I think that's, a lot of us are having that conversation now. I'm not going to spoil what he has to say, but I do want to just bring up what he said in one small nugget. He said, we need to be funding mission and not projects or something of that sort. And like, we should constantly be evaluating, is the mission done? Is the mission, like we said, we wanted people to be saved. Like, and we wanted this and this and that to happen. Is that done?
Yep.
Or are we just saying, okay, it's time to shift the money to another place? And I think far too often we're like, this is real life too. Hey, we would rather have this thing for these kids at this large church facility than to continue to fund this guy who's in this really tough context that we'll never go to. But you know, he's faithful and he's trying to pursue these things. So anyway, that's a conversation for another day. I don't want to waste all our time, and we have to shift a little bit. So, bro, I think I've told you this personally, but you encouraged me so much, like as you were pastoring Reconcile Community Church. And there were times where I got caught up in this whirlwind of numbers and growth and all of that. And then I look over to see what y'all are doing, and you're like, all right, we're going to talk about silence and solitude. And I'm like, yo, like he's not worried about, I mean, I knew that it was in the back of your mind, but I'm like, I felt like it took so much courage for you to be like, man, I'm not going to do a relationship series or at the movies or some wildly external sermon series to bring people in. You were really concerned with equipping your people to for how to live a spiritual life with their Savior. And that blew me away, man. What has charged you up so much to have that type of focus as you pastor?
Yeah, man. It goes back to college. Man, I told you, like, a lot of what shaped me, you know, was that discipleship moment that I had in college with Jamie. And he always told me that, you know, your relationship with Jesus is what matters. And so that carried with me. And so even as I pastor, one of the things that I kept asking myself, I kept telling myself was this. At one point, I used to be a personal trainer. And the mark of a great personal trainer is that the client is not with you always. They're not with you always. There should be a point in time where you equip them with the necessary tools and they understand their body enough where then they can go out and do it. Right. And so I had this framework of, man, it's got to be about building and equipping the saints for the work of the ministry, but I want them to love Jesus, and I don't want them to be handicapped to pastor being able to have to do everything for them. But at the same time, what happens if I go away? Like what happens if, you know, and it's crazy, Reconcile ended up, you know, shutting down, but it was always in the back of my head. Like, I want to make sure that, man, the people who come through Reconcile Community Church are growing and being equipped so that they can love Jesus well, that they can make disciples and impact their communities where they are. And so that shaped everything that we did. Like, and so, yeah, we went through books of the Bible, and then I was like, man, spiritual formation is something that's crucial, like these habits. And so we walked through, man, spiritual formation in the hood, you know,
during the pandemic, like we doing silence and solitude and all of these different things. I started a podcast for a daily devotional show. And man, we did that for, I think I did 367 episodes or something like that, where every morning I would get up, I would open up my Bible, I would turn on live, and whatever the Lord gave to me in that moment is what came through that microphone. So there was no prep work, there was nothing like that. But the whole goal and premise of that was to model to the congregation of Reconcile Community Church what it looks like to have a time with the Lord. And we do it in community. That's why it went away, because it wasn't like we put it on Facebook because that was the easiest medium to get it to the people. It just so happened that, like, everybody else in Facebook world and social media world was able to see it. But that was specifically for the people of Reconcile Community Church. That's why I hadn't come back. And so, like, the whole goal was to equip the people, because I wanted them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And I felt like if, man, the people of Reconcile Community Church could do that, that's a win. That's what we're supposed to be doing. I feel like, man, me as a pastor, that's what I feel like we're called to do. And I'm like, that's a heavy conviction on me. So if we don't got all of the bells and whistles, I'm fine with that. But if y'all know how to walk with the Savior, I'll rock with that. Yeah. If you know that you can leave from this place and say, I know how to make a disciple, I'll rock with that. So I started asking myself the question, what do I need to do to make sure that we can instill that into the people? And so that's kind of what we did. I love it. I love it, dog. Man, I get it, man. Like, I'm not pumping you up at all, bro. Like, I'm truly encouraged. Because I'm like, man, you're so disciplined and you hear from God and you move. And
Mhm.
that's what a lot of us have to focus on is just like, man, God told me this. I'm going to move. I'm going to be disciplined with it.
Yeah.
Man, before Reconcile Community Church shut down, you were
Mhm.
able to join me in a network that I have been a part of since
Yeah.
2019, I think,
Mhm.
maybe 18.
Yeah.
And that's it was Sojourn Network. That's what I
Yeah.
joined.
Uh-huh.
I
Me
feel
too.
like I feel like one of those black people that was there before integration. They're like, see, I was there with Sojourn. Y'all at the new thing.
Y'all got the new.
But yeah, man. So I joined Sojourn, and at the time I joined it, there wasn't a lot of diversity, but I
Yeah.
felt very comfortable with the brothers that are there, brothers and sisters and family that's there. And then you came along, and you came along with, I think, a wave of diversity
Mhm.
that was brought to the network. And then recently, you joined the staff at Harbor Network, man. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing and how you're still,
Yeah.
even though your church plant is not active right now, you're still involved with church planting.
Yeah. So yeah, I joined I'm an OG too, kinda sojourn guy. But no, yeah, we joined, and one of the reasons why we joined the network, man, was because of the authenticity of the friendships that were there.
Hmm.
But then at the same time, man, there was an emphasis on the care of the pastor, his wife, and they're saying healthy pastors plant healthy churches. That's what they were saying at the time. Now, we have new slogans and things of that nature. But man, it was such a joy to be a part of the network. And yeah, you're right. It wasn't that many people, minorities in the network, but man, with Pastor Jamal being, becoming the president and all of these things happening, you started to see this wave that was taking place where, man, diversity was being valued, and we were starting to see faces and stuff. And so the crazy thing was, we got in, they appreciated our voices, and that mattered. There were seats at the tables that were offered to us to consider, like, what was happening, and that mattered. And so when the church plant folded, man, they reached out to me, and this man, I try not to get choked up when I think of this. I know there are some networks where, man, once your church folds, man, you kind of, that's it. The
Mm-hmm.
relationship's over. Man, they didn't throw me away, and man, that mattered to me. So they ended a conversation with me. It was like, man, let's dream together. I'll never forget that. Dave was like, Laird, let's me, you, and Ed, let's dream together. Ed is the director of church planting and multiplication, and so they knew that I had some organizational gifts. I told them, man, I still feel, man, led in this season. I don't necessarily feel led to be a church planter anymore, but I want to be able to support church planters in some kind of capacity. If it's possible, I'll do it. And man, they dreamed that up. And earlier this year, they offered me an opportunity to become the coordinator for church planting and multiplication. And so essentially what I do is I help Ed Marcel, who is our director of church planting and multiplication. I help reshape and reimagine our church planting ministry arm of Harbor Network. And so we created programming around a 3-year cycle for church planters. And so now they have retreats they go to, there's Zoom calls they go through, they have coaches, there's like coaching collectives that we've created. And so I get to like create the programming that supports past church planters. But then at the same time, I get to help them on the front end through assessments. And then a lot of my time, I just get to sit on the phone with these brothers and tell them, you're not crazy.
Mm.
And I get to tell them, like, man, look, roll up my sleeve and be like, I got the scars to prove it. Don't go down this road if you don't have to. I get to like just basically pastor church planters. And that's my role. That's my job. And man, it's just been such a joy to be able to do because I've just been able to take all of the information and knowledge that I've had in planting and planting and pastoring in all these different spaces and just help equip the next generation of planters and be able to speak to the realities of minority planters coming into these spaces. I get to say like, hey, man, it'd be great if we reimagine funding. It'll be great to have guys in some of these places that may be hard places. They may not necessarily fit all of these different molds, but man, they're good brothers, and they would be a benefit to this network. Like I get a seat at the table, and we're always talking about, man, we need to build new tables. And yes, that's true. But there are some of us who need to go into these places and be present to help change and shift some stuff. And so I feel like that's my role with the network. And again, they've given me a space to be able to use my gifts And man, I spend the rest of my time loving on church planters and making sure that they thrive, not just survive, but man, help. How can we get you to thrive in your context? And that's my role.
Love it, man. I love it. I'm having a little trouble with my mic. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you still hear me? Okay, cool. So yeah, man, Harbor is really near and dear to my heart. So I felt like that move was it was a no-brainer, man. So I'm happy that you're in that. We're gonna wrap up in a second, but I like to spend the last few minutes just doing like some shotgun questions and all that stuff. You watched the last interview, so you kind of get an idea. I'm not gonna ask you about hip hop artists. I'm gonna ask you because you've sat under some of the best preaching that there is, right? Man, who top 3 favorite preachers?
Oh yeah. So Brian Loritz, of course. I've watched that man write a sermon in a like the side of his Bible and preach it. I would say Dr. Robert Smith Jr. Doctrine That Dances. I seen him absolutely, man, just nuts. So I have those 2 guys. And then I would say my pastor, Bishop Gary G. Hales. Man, the creativity, the nuance, man, just the exegetical prowess. Yeah, my pastor, Bishop Gary G. Hales, is in my top 3.
Okay, love it. Dog, let me ask you this: what do you think the future of church planting is?
I'm a little nervous right now. If I'm honest, I think there's going to have to be a generation that's going to look back and appreciate the past way of church planting, but there's going to have to be a new crop of planters who are a little bit more courageous. I'm cautiously hopeful that there are going to be planters who are going to come up and are going to reimagine what it looks like for planting to take place. And so, man, yeah, I think because of just how the circumstances, situations are, I think, man, just a new crop of guys who are going to just be bold, be honest, be imaginative, take their convictions and imagination and just do something crazy. It's just been slow coming. So I'm cautiously optimistic about it.
Okay. I agree with you with that too. In a sense, I also am looking forward to 10, 15 years down the line and seeing, like, looking back at our stories in 15 years to see how crazy they were. Okay. I'm coming up to see you at some point. This is
Absolutely.
a fact, right?
Absolutely.
Where are we going to eat, man? Where we going to eat? And I know, look, y'all can't see this man, but he was a personal trainer. He was a D1 athlete. So he's healthy, but I'm sure the man knows how to eat.
Man, so it depends on what you want, though. So, man, I'm gonna take you to Tella, which is right by my house. Anybody who know me who watching this is gonna say, they probably put it in the chat. He gonna say Tella. Man, just a local spot here. Man, that's awesome. Man, I'm gonna take you over to the Innovation Center so you can get some real eatery. Shout out to Jaleesa. She was making breakfast today. Anything that she makes is fire. Absolute certified fire. Yeah, man, I'm gonna take you over there. I'm gonna take you to let's see. It's a staple. It's a Cincinnati staple. I gotta say it. If I don't say it, I'm not even from Cincinnati. I'm gonna take you to Skyline Chili. I'm gonna make you taste a 3-way and a cheese coney here. It's a rites of passage. You probably not gonna like it, but you gotta do it. You got it.
It's like a chili dog.
Yeah, but it's different.
I love chili dogs.
It's different. I'm just gonna tell you, it's different. But I gotta tell you there. So those are my 3 spots, man. Honestly, I'm gonna take you to Tella. I'll take you to Royal Eatery. She's been doing stuff out of the Innovation Center in Lincoln Heights. Shout out to Jaleesa. Amazing food. And then, man, I'm going to take you to Skyline. Those are 3 spots I'm going to take you. There's multiple other places I'll take you, but I'll take you those 3 spots. And you'll be eating good.
Favorite time in ministry, like, period. Favorite time?
Man, good question. Just one? Oh. Yeah, okay. So one of the coolest moments, we had a girl who was a part of our church plant. And she gotten saved during the pandemic, ended up moving to Columbus, Ohio. Well, she moved back to Cleveland. but came back. Her parents lived in Columbus. She wanted to be baptized. So members of the church drove up to Columbus, Ohio. Man, we brought my wife's birth pool because she's a midwife. We put that thing in the basement of her mama's house, and we had a baptism service in her mama's house. And like, she had members of her family in there who didn't know Jesus. So she shared her testimony and everything, man. And man, that was just one of the highlights of ministry for me, to be like, man, this is wild, but we did it. And yeah, that was a highlight for me.
I love it. All right, I'm gonna give you a couple minutes. Any last things you want to bring up, and then I'll end with one last question, and that'll be it.
Yeah, man. Look, so I would say, man, any church planter, man, who's considering wanting to be a part of a network, man, I cannot recommend enough Harbor Network to you. It is an awesome network. Both of us have been blessed by it. Of course, I'm biased because I worked for them, but man, I honestly can say it's a network that loves and cares for you. And also for any minority pastor, any pastor in general, if you're planting in an urban space, man, I want you to check out World Impact. World Impact was absolutely crucial for us when we moved to Lincoln Heights. The president is Alvin Sanders. Man, they do a whole bunch of wraparound services that support pastors and planters in urban spaces. You can get certified in trauma healing. If you haven't gone to seminary, they do seminary training. Man, they do a host of different things, and it's specifically for pastors in urban places. And so, man, if that's you, check out World Impact, and man, tell them that I sent you over there. They have awesome programming that will help you to go farther and faster.
I love it, man. We're probably gonna have to do 3 or 4 more of these. I mean, but we'll probably talk on the phone in the next couple of weeks or so.
Absolutely,
man. I want to say I appreciate you, dog. Like, you are a true friend. You are a person that inspires me. You kind of you help me see Jesus in the hardest of times, and you being on this podcast, it was a no-brainer for me because I want this podcast to be real. And I want people to hear authentic stories about guys like you who can say, hey, no, it was hard. I was underfunded. We ended up having to shut our doors. And yet God is still good, and he's still working, and we're still doing things, man. Absolutely. So, man, I love you. I appreciate you, brother. Last thing I'm going to ask you is, even though we've mentioned 47 people already, man, who needs to be on this podcast that you can help get on the podcast?
Yeah, so I will do my part to get Derek Puckett on here, Dr. Brian Loritz on here. Man, there's a pastor out of West Virginia. His name is Bishop Wayne Crozier. Man, a testament of faithfulness. Man, he's my parent, my in-laws pastor. Man, doing phenomenal work in West Virginia. Absolutely phenomenal work. I think his story of perseverance, I won't share it with you all. I think it would be best if he shared it. Man, it's amazing. His friendship with a very well-known and respected pastor is just, a very interesting thing. So definitely I'll try my best to get Pastor Wayne Crozier on here for you. And then I think, man, you need to have Pastor Jamal Williams on here, man. His story
he's gonna be on. He's gonna be on.
Yeah, his story, and I can help you with that one too. It's just, man, it needs to be heard, especially for pastors. And then there's one other guy. There's 2 other guys. Chris Woodard here in Cincinnati. He's now the pastor of River of Life Church. And then there's another brother named Brian Taylor. His church is called Bethel. Well, it's now called All Nations Cincinnati. That brother is solid. He's also our fraternity brother too. But like, man, he is solid, man. And what he's doing, the innovation, man, just how he's come about, like ministry and his college affiliation and how he planted a church, phenomenal. And they won. So yeah, bro, those will be the brothers that I will personally reach out to help you get on.
I appreciate it, bro. Yeah, Jamal's going to be on in a couple months or so. So we got that one in the works already. And I'm sure some of the mutual friends we have, they'll be on. But yeah, I'd love to get in contact with some of your Ohio. Who are y'all, Ohioans?
Yeah, man. You need to have Kurt. You know what? You need to have Kurt Hanna on here, man.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep thinking of names, brother.
There you go.
You give me a minute. I'll give you about 50 of them, man.
I love
Especially some Cincinnatians, man. They're doing great work.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, we're going to wrap up for today. Remember that the purpose of all this is that you tell the story, tell it accurately, because people need to hear real stories about what God is doing in church planting, in church leadership, and pastoring, and just following Jesus completely in all of life. Thank you for watching Tell the Story, Doc, with the special guest, Brandon Woodard, and you're watching this on All of Life TV.